What's going on, guys? Scar coming at you with another Magic the Gathering video. In today's video, we dive into part 2 of the starter decks that are coming with the new August update for MTG Arena. If you saw my previous video, there's a link going to be up in the corner here just to kind of, if you want to go back and watch that one first. We go through the first 5 decks that I saw. I came across this Reddit article over the weekend that had listed these 10 new starter decks that were announced, I guess, over the weekend. I couldn't 100% find other information to verify, but I did see that there was a Wizard of the Coast employee in these articles, so they were kind of saying that these lists were pretty much close to the finalized versions. I know some of them were noted to change just because, you know, they're still tweaking here and there, but in August we will be getting new starter decks for the new player experience for Magic the Gathering Arena. If you've just recently started playing or been playing, if you went through the whole process of starting out with like the very basic solid decks, the monocolored stuff, and then you eventually branched out into doing dual color decks, that's kind of what's going to happen. They're going to revamp them because the cards that are currently in the previous starters are going to be rotated out and moving into historic mode, so they have to kind of re-update those if you want to bring people into standard, which is their more premier type of gameplay in MTG Arena. As much as standard right now is kind of a mess, you say what you want about it, standard is the, you know, the current, the more new stuff, all the new things, so if you play standard, you kind of know what I'm talking about. So enough said, guys. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you want to post more videos, hit that subscribe button. But let's move on to the decks. Let's kind of break it down and see what's going on. All right, so moving into the first deck, we have an Izzet Spells deck. I call it Izzet Spells just because the basis here, if you haven't seen any of the Izzet decks that are currently out there in MTG Arena, I've kind of already did one on Izzet Spells where like you get benefits for playing non-creature spells with creatures to get some extra damage in. This deck here is kind of one of those situations. It is kind of like a weird way to see how spells and interact with things that kind of have non-trigger abilities. So overall, the deck is pretty straightforward. The goal here is play things, draw cards, play things, pump your creatures up by playing these spells, play spells to eliminate your opponent's creatures, and hopefully swing and win the game that way. So overall, the deck is straightforward in the sense that it is pretty basic. You can kind of get an understanding just from looking at the creature base, the mana base, the stuff that's in the deck, and it plays with a couple little special tricks in the deck, you know, a little bit of flair just to kind of give it some give the deck some rarities. But overall, it plays a lot of things that benefit from you playing spells, putting them in your graveyard and things like that. So to first start it off, we're going to start with the Opt. It's a 4 of here in the deck. It helps you scry initially, so you look at the top card of your library, you decide if you want to keep it on top or move it to the bottom, and then you get to draw a card. So this is very good if you want to set up something or just get something into your hand, like you're looking for maybe that other land that you didn't draw, or maybe you're just looking for an answer to maybe opponent's creature that is on the board. So that's definitely a good card right there. Then you got the Stern Dismissal. It's a bounce back, so you can target creature or enchantment an opponent controls and it bounces back to their hand. So it's kind of like an unsummon, but can also target enchantments, which is good if they have like something like one of those Thassa's or one of those indestructible enchantments. Maybe they have a Doom Foretold. You can bounce it back, you know, to their hand, so then you don't have to worry about the trigger. But overall, it's a good bounce back spell. It's pretty much the unsummon, but with enchantment also. Then you got Shock. It's a 2 of with some spot removal, 2 damage to any target. Definitely good to get that extra damage to your opponent's face if you're getting low. Always a good feeling when you top deck that Shock when your opponent's down to 2 life, or just to get that key creature out of the way when you shock it to kill it off after maybe it made a block or something like that. Definitely a good feeling, but Shock is in the deck. Then we got Anticipate. It's a 2 cost, 2 mana spell. Look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, the rest on the bottom. So it's kind of this like let's take out the top 3, let's take a look, and we're going to choose one of them, put into our hand, and, you know, put the rest in the bottom. So, you know, if you're going to be in a clump of lands, you kind of get through 2 lands that may be sitting on top and then get to the card that's behind them, and also move them to the bottom so you don't actually draw into them later is definitely good. So it's pretty much like a built-in scry ability, but you draw 3 and, you know, move it to the bottom. Riddle Form here is an enchantment here that came from M21. If you don't know what it is, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may have Riddle Form become a 3/3 Sphinx with flying in addition to its other types, as well as you can also tap 3 mana and scry, so it has a built-in scry ability, and it has a built-in ability if you play maybe a spell on your opponent's turn. If they go into attack, you can always, you know, shock a creature out of the way, and then, you know, play from that shock, he is going to become a 3/3, which can block another creature, or you can always get aggressive and actually use him as an attacker and swing in because it has flying. So definitely a cool enchantment like that to show some interactivity with non-creature spells and enchantments. Then you got the Voidalin Arcanist. It has the ability to actually, it's a 1/3 for 2, which is actually pretty solid. Definitely can block those aggressive little 1/1 creatures, 2/2 creatures without dying. You can also tap them down for colorless mana, and you can use that to actually cast instants or sorceries. With our deck consistent of a bunch of instants and sorceries, you can definitely use it to actually probably play something in the later game, you know, as a block, and maybe let's play a spell in the process, or just to get that instant or sorcery spell on your turn, just to play to maybe get out something later in the game. Forbidden Friendship is the next card up. It's a 2-cost token generator. Creates a 1/1 red dinosaur token and with haste, and a 1/1 white human soldier token. So it's a 2 mana, create 2 tokens at sorcery speed, but one of them has haste, so you can play it on turn 2, swing it for 1, and keep a blocker back. Definitely a cool card. There's a deck I do play with Transmogrify, where I use like these kind of tokens, and I try to get something into big that comes into battle and pumps up my creatures and swing it for big damage. But Forbidden Friendship's cool just because it, you know, creates some threats on the board or creates chump blockers. But the only problem is it's sorcery speed, so you can only do it on your turn. Scorching Dragonfire is another card from M21. It's been reprinted multiple times, I think, throughout Standard. But it's a 3 damage instant speed spell that can do it to a target creature or planeswalker. But the thing here is, if that creature or planeswalker does die from this spell, or just dies this turn in general, it gets exiled. You can also sneak it in if you ever tried on someone playing an Uro. You can actually, like, as it enters the battlefield, you can go like full control mode and actually deal 3 damage to it. So when it gets actually sacrificed, it actually then goes to exile. It's not something that happens too often, but if you're ever playing like a deck that runs these, you can do some cool little tricks like that. Maybe get a cat or something like that too. I mean, cat's kind of pointless, but you can definitely get something off the battlefield with a Scorching Dragonfire. It's definitely a pretty good card that I think is going to probably see more play once rotation happens. Then you got Sure Strike. It's another just instant speed pump card that gives target creature +3/+0 and first strike. So your opponent can attack in with maybe a 2/2, 3/3, and you have block with your 1/1 blocker. You give it a tap 2 mana, give it +3/+0 and first strike. So now it actually hits the creature before the creature hits it back. So the token lives, and you get to kill the creature. It also prevents any creatures that have death touch and/or lifelink. So with first strike, you actually hit the creature unless the creature itself has first strike back. But if they don't have first strike, you actually deal the damage before they actually deal damage back. So it actually gets through and prevents your opponent from either killing the creature in the process and/or, you know, gaining the life from the lifelink. You got the 1 Brazen Borrower, as this deck kind of throws in some rares and mythics. It's a pretty good card that you see a lot of play in a lot of these kind of blue flashy kind of decks or spell decks, just because it's a 3 mana 3/1 flyer that can be casted as haste, so you can bring it in instantly at the end of your turn or your opponent's turn, and kind of, you know, swing with it on your turn. Or you can actually pay the Adventure spell, which is a 2 mana bounce back target permanent or non-land permanent opponent controls to their hand. So it's, they play something, you bounce it back at the end of their turn. Maybe if you have extra mana open, you can then play your Brazen Borrower, make them have to repay it again. And the fact is, when you pay the Adventure, it actually goes to a separate pile, so now your opponent can't actually remove that card remove Brazen Borrower from your hand, so you can hold on to it until you're ready to actually play it and maybe get a good strike. So definitely a cool card in that sense. Then we got Frost Breath. It's a card from M21 that makes you tap 2 target creatures, and then makes those creatures not untap during their controller's next on top steps. So your opponent goes to attack step, you, in response of them moving over to attack step, you actually tap 2 of their creatures, maybe the 2 biggest, and prevent them from actually attacking for the next 2 turns. So it kind of just, you know, slows the game down a little bit, maybe get you to be able to catch up, or maybe just take advantage of and maybe swing in for lethal eventually. You get the Wavebreak Hippocamp. It's a 3-cost 2/2. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, draw a card. So it's one of those things that if you play more reactive with this card, you're actually gonna get a lot of benefits. I mean, for playing a spell to then draw a card in response, it's definitely pretty cool in that sense, because then you're gonna refill your hand back up, maybe with another spell that you can then follow up with, and or just kind of refill your hand back up with more threats. Definitely a cool card. Definitely something that maybe you want to increase as you kind of maybe play the deck and maybe want to build it out a little bit more. Then we got the Spell Eater Wolverine from Ikoria. I always get Ikoria and Theros mixed up. Don't ask me why, they're completely 2 different symbols, but just because it's the last set that came out. But this is from Ikoria. I haven't really seen any play with this, but it's pretty cool that it gets double strike as long as there's 3 more instants or sorcery cards in our graveyard. So there's a lot in our creature spells in our deck, so this thing's definitely gonna get double strike at some point. It's a 3-cost 3/2. Definitely a cool little card, a cool little thing that can get, you know, pretty dangerous if their opponent doesn't keep it in check. It does have a 2 toughness, so it can get spot removal, but to have something with a 3/2 double strike, it's going to catch your opponent off guard. Maybe, you know, you already have 2 spells in your graveyard, they go in for attack, and you cast like maybe a shock and then block their other creature with this. They're not going to expect it, and, you know, you may get away with a cool little, like, you know, little block there. Experimental Overlord is another spell that came from M21. We had to create an XX blue-red weird creature token where X is the number of instant sorcery cards in our graveyard. Then we may return target instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to our hand, and then we have to exile this card afterwards. So it's definitely another cool card too. As we get kind of later into the game and we want to kind of come up with something to finish our opponent off, we can then play this weird Experimental Overlord card, get another instant or sorcery, maybe for some sort of spot removal. Maybe we want to kind of dig a little bit deeper into our deck and play one of our spells that we played earlier in the game, like an Anticipate, or even like later in the deck we're going to go over Boon the Wishgiver. Maybe it's like a very big, expensive, draw a bunch of cards type things. Definitely a cool card to kind of get things back. And we play 3 copies, which is actually pretty cool, because this could definitely become a big threat for our opponent if they don't keep it in check. Then we have the Stormwing Entity. It's a 5-cost 3/3 with Flying and Prowess. Prowess is a thing whenever we cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1 until the turn. Also, when this comes in the battlefield, we get the Scry 2, so we can set the next like 2 draws, which is pretty cool. If we don't like what's on top, we can always start them on the bottom. If we like one card, we can keep one on top, one on the bottom. But the idea that he actually gets to set up our board. Also, the other thing too, if you play him on a turn that you've already casted a spell, an instant or sorcery, he actually costs 3 less. So he goes down to a 2-mana 3/3 with Flying and Prowess. So if you cast like an Opt, and Anticipate, any of that stuff, especially in the early game, 3/3 with all these abilities is definitely pretty cool. As well as you can then set up a couple turns afterwards to maybe hopefully protect him and or set up maybe a future lethal flying attack if your opponent's not expecting it. Then we got the Double Vision, another cool little card from M21. Whenever we cast our first instant or sorcery spell, each turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So if we play this on turn 5, we have 1 mana open for a shock or something like that. We actually cast that shock. On our opponent's turn, we now copy that shock, so we have 2 copies of shock, and now we can redirect that second shock to something else, or maybe another shock to just do another 2 damage to maybe kill the creature completely. Definitely a cool card. Definitely because we play a lot of things that are non-creature spell based. This card definitely probably will get a couple triggers if our opponent hasn't killed us by this point. If you're playing in like a more like meta standard, this card may not be fast enough to hopefully keep up with your opponents without playing more meta decks, but this is definitely a cool card that kind of fits with this unique setup of playing a lot of non-creature spells. Boon of the Wishgiver is a card that costs 6 mana. We get to draw 4 cards, but we can cycle it early in the game for 1 mana to draw just a single card, so definitely a cool effect there. But drawing 4 cards in the late game, if we get it back for like Experimental Overlord, we'll refill our hand back up, allow us to kind of, you know, hopefully try to take advantage of the game, have enough spells in our hand to hopefully deal with what our opponent's playing, and hopefully finish out the game that way. But overall, pretty cool card, and the fact that you can also cycle and still draw a card. Shark Typhoon's another card. Definitely interesting aspect. Depending on the matchup you're playing, you can either play it as the Cycling card, which is a 2 mana X, where you tap X and you get a shark that's an XX equal to the X you paid, or we can play it as a 6 mana enchantment, whereas we play a non-creature spell, we get a shark equal to that non-creature spell's cost. So in the late game, if we're playing things that cost 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, you get sharks equal to that value. This deck only has 1, so you can't stack multiple Shark Typhoons, but if you've got more of these, you can actually stack multiples of them, and every time you cast a single spell, you then get 2 tokens equal to that, 3 tokens, depending on how many are out on the board. But it's also cool in the sense that if you really need to dig a little bit deeper, you get a Shark token as well if you actually pay more than 3 mana. Stolen by the Fae is another card from Stolen by Fae is another card from Throne of Eldraine. It's a card that makes us return target creature card with a cost X or less to our hand. We get to create X 1/1 blue fairy tokens with flying. So if, like, say for example, they're going to do something to our Stormwing entity, or maybe we want to just create a bunch of tokens, we can return one of our creatures back to our hand. Or actually, sorry, I read that wrong. We can bounce back one of our opponent's creatures with a converted cost X, and we create X blue fairy tokens with flying in response. So this is something we could turn something, maybe like our opponent played something really, really big, we bounce it back to their hand, making them replay it so they can't attack if it doesn't have haste on the following turn. Then we get create X blue fairy tokens where X is gonna, you know, hopefully be enough to maybe finish out the game, create enough chump blockers if they have other things out on the field, or just frustrate your opponent to the point where they just scoop you just because you just bounce back maybe their strongest thing, and somehow you get rewarded by an X amount of tokens. But overall, that, I mean, is the deck. It also plays 10 islands, 10 mountains, and 4 swift water cliffs. The deck is pretty interesting. I played like an Izzet Prowess deck with a little bit more refinement, but this seems like a cool version of showing you how like non-creature spells and creatures can interact, or things interact with non-creature spells. Definitely a cool deck to check out once these decks get released onto MTG Arena. All right, so the next deck up was we have an Azorious deck of some sorts. It's a mixture of enchantment kind of Azorious and artifacts. So the goal here is we're going to be playing a lot of enchantment spells. There's some artifacts in the deck that kind of get things. We also play all that glitters, where it gets pumped, you know, it pumps the creature based on how many enchantments or artifacts we have on the battlefield. So it's pretty interesting. It's more aggro centric. It's maybe more mid-rangey, I would say, of a deck, but overall it's pretty cool. So it plays Kiramuch's Blessing, which protects anything that's enchanted. Gives a +2/+2 if it's an enchanted creature or enchantment creature. It can also gains hexproof and indestructible. So if we play it on something that has an enchantment on it, we will protect it from, you know, getting removed and or getting a board wiped or something like that. Or if it, you know, someone tries to target our creature with a spell, like trying to bounce it back to our hand, we can protect it because given it hexproof, they can't target it with spells. Then we play the Eidolon Philosophy. This is actually an enchantment creature, so this is something that, you know, we can play Kiramuch's Blessing on without an enchantment on it. It's a 1/2. I'm not saying that's what we're going to do, but it's something that we don't need enchantments on to protect if we want to keep it on the board. But we can tap 7 mana, sacrifice this, and draw 3 cards. The ability is kind of meh, but the idea, it's a 1/2 creature that it costs 1 mana that maybe we can play like all that glitters on, and eventually, you know, it counts as itself as an enchantment, so all the glitter gets bigger, creature gets bigger, and this is something that we, you know, can blow up or protect later in the game. All that glitters is the enchantment that I was talking about. It's a 2 mana enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and enchantment. As you can see here, the deck is built around playing enchantments, possibly some artifacts, but overall it's just, you know, playing all that glitters, making other things better, playing enchantments, making all that glitters better. Goal of the deck is to just, you know, hopefully get a big enough creature, swing in for big enough damage, and win the game that way. Birth of Meletis is another card that's from Theros. It's a 2 mana enchantment saga card that we get to search our library for a basic plains card, add it to our hand. We then on phase 2 create a 0/4 wall, and then on phase 3 we get we gain 2 life. Definitely a good early game, you know, kind of thin our deck out by getting the plains from it, getting a blocker to maybe prevent maybe our opponent's early game threats, and then gaining some life, you know, if they're playing something a little more aggressive, and we may have lost some life in the process. But definitely a cool card in the fact that it has multiple steps to it. You only have to pay the mana once. Stinging Lionfish is a 2 mana 2/1. Whenever we cast our first spell during each opponent's turn, we may tap or untap target non-land permanent. So we can tap down someone that our opponent's playing. If we swung in on our turn, we can untap something that we swung in with to kind of, you know, add an additional blocker. Definitely cool in that sense that we can actually tap or untap non-land permanent. So it doesn't even, we can even tap down like an enchantment, you know, tap down an artifact, you know, anything that they may be using to try to like maybe trigger something. We can tap it down before they can actually use it. I mean, if the creature doesn't have summoning sickness, I guess in response they can also tap it down. But if you catch them maybe during their draw step or pre-main phase, you can actually maybe, you know, prevent them from adding mana to their mana pool or anything like that. Definitely, you know, a cool thing to do in response. Banishing Light is another enchantment card here. You know, it just removes target non-land permanent from the battlefield until this enchantment leaves. Definitely a cool card to kind of slow your opponent down, get rid of something that may be threatening you, just get rid of that one pesky thing if to get in for that final bit of damage. Definitely a cool card. It's an enchantment, helps us all, helps our all that glitters, helps our enchantment focus of the deck. Midnight Clock's another card. It's a 3-cost artifact that we can tap it for blue mana. You tap 3 mana, we put an hour counter on it. Then during each of our upkeeps, we put an hour counter on the Midnight Clock. Once it has its 12th counter, we get to shuffle our hand and our graveyard into our library, and then we draw a new 7 cards and we exile Midnight Clock. So definitely a cool little card that we get play in the early game, and eventually we get to pretty much redraw a hand. So if we start getting thin by like turn 6, turn 7, we play this on turn 3, you know, we may have added a couple midnight counters to it. We eventually, you know, will refresh our hand and also refresh our deck by just shuffling everything back together. So definitely a cool card. Nihilite of the Hidden Codes is 3-cost 2/3. As long as it's not our turn, spells we cast cost 1 less, so we can cast anything in response to something, 1 for 1 less mana. So if we have any instant source or instant speed spells, we can then make it just that much cheaper, so make something that maybe costs 3 into 2, and then we don't have to worry about, you know, paying that additional mana. Catch our opponent off guard if we're playing something in response to something, to remove something or bounce something back. Definitely a cool card. Thirst for Meaning is one of those cards. We can draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless we discard an enchantment card. So the deck plays a lot of enchantments, so we can maybe get rid of something that we don't really need. Maybe it's not really good if we drew it later in the game. Filling our hand back up with 3 cards and keeping 2 of them is definitely a cool thing. Definitely a good card for this kind of style of deck. Shambling Suit is a 3-cost artifact that equals the number of artifacts and or enchantments we control, so it takes benefit of us playing a bunch of enchantments. So it's kind of like a artifact creature that has built-in All That Glitters. The only problem is it only has 3 toughness, so it doesn't protect itself. But if you put All That Glitters on this, it's like almost double the effect in that sense. So definitely a cool little card like that, and All That Glitters would definitely help up its toughness, but it almost would have double the power, just because the power would just be getting doubled for everything that we include. Archon of Sun's Grace is another card that benefits from us playing enchantments. It has flying, it has lifelink, it's a 3/4, and when it's down on the battlefield, Pegasus creatures we control have lifelink, and whenever we play an enchantment, enters the battlefield under our control, we get a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying, so pretty much we create a token army of Pegasuses. We can swing in, keep them up as chump blockers, they all have lifelink as long as this is on the battlefield. Definitely a cool way to kind of fly over the top of our opponent and have a lot of lifelink and maybe gain some enough life and kind of steal the game from our opponent. Luminous Broodmoth is another card here in the deck. It pretty much makes all our creatures that whenever they die, we get to return them to the battlefield under our control, but now they have a flying counter on it. So if they don't have if the creature doesn't have flying already, our creatures will now come back with flying on it as well, so we can make a big swing. You know, whatever dies then comes back into the battlefield, maybe re-triggering their whenever they come into battlefield effects, or just trying to get enough damage in, maybe kill off a couple creatures blockers, and then, you know, have another swing for the following turn to match up, and now all these creatures are untapped as if they didn't swing, which is definitely cool for to be able to keep a defense in case they decide to swing back. Capture Sphere is another card from M21, has flash, costs 4 mana. Whenever it enters the battlefield, tap target enchanted creature, and now this pretty much keeps that creature tapped and it doesn't untap during their controller's untap step. So it's like a permanent lockdown in a way until they remove Capture Sphere. So now this creature never untaps unless they can bounce back the creature and or remove the enchantment from it. Arcanist Owl helps us dig through our deck a little bit. It's a 4-cost 3/3 artifact bird. Whenever it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of our library. We may reveal artifact or enchantment card among them, put it into our hand, and put the rest on the battlefield in the bottom of our library in any order. So it's definitely a way to kind of dig a little bit deeper if we're looking for possibly an answer, or just looking for maybe an All That Glitters or something like that. This is also an artifact creature, so it will actually benefit from like an All That Glitters because it counts itself as an artifact creature. So definitely a cool little flyer that helps us dig a little bit deeper, hopefully get into our deck and hopefully get to an answer that we may need. Elspeth Conqueror's Death is something that if you've been playing Magic the Gathering, something you see in Azorious decks in general. It's just a solid 5-cost enchantment that lets us exile target creature, or non-land permanent, I should say, actually not creature. Target permanent an opponent controls with a converted mana cost 3 or greater, so it pretty much removes a lot of your opponent's big endgame threats. Non-creature spells on the following phase make our opponent cost 2 more to cast. And then on turn 3, we can turn target creature or planeswalker back from our graveyard to the battlefield and put a +1/+1 or loyalty counter on it. So we get to bring back anything that gets put back in the graveyard to the battlefield. Now it's just that much stronger. I don't think we play any planeswalkers, so more than likely in this deck it's going to be a creature. Banished into the Fable is a card from Throne. It's whenever we cast a spell from our hand, copy it if you control artifact, and copy it if you control an enchantment, so it copies the spell twice. You may choose new targets for the copy. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. You create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. So pretty much we cast a spell, we make multiple copies, as long as we control one or the other. So if we control both, we get the effect twice, and we get to bounce back up to 3 things, get 3 2/2 white knights with vigilance. So definitely a cool way to kind of clear our opponent's board, bounce things back to their hand, make kind of have to repay that, and then we get some creatures in return. Then we get the Brine Giant, 7 mana common. This spell costs 1 less for each enchantment we control, so it's a thing that gets the benefit of if the more enchantments we have, it gets cheaper. So if we play it by like turn 3, it may be like a 3-cost 5/6. Definitely kind of cool if even in the late game we have a lot of enchantments on the battlefield. It could be a 1 mana 5/6 just to kind of fill the board back up with something a little bit dangerous. Then we got the Kiora, the Beast of the Sea God. It's a 7 mana enchantment. Create an 8/8 blue Kraken creature token with hexproof. Definitely a cool little endgame threat that our opponent can't really deal directly with. They'll have to board wipe completely to get rid of it. The following phase, we get to tap all non-permanent second that player controls, and they don't tap during the opponent's untap step on their following turn. And then on the last phase, we get to gain control of target permanent. It doesn't untap, and we gain control of it. So definitely cool. So we can gain something, gain the control of something, give it back to us, untap it, and maybe swing in and maybe finish out the game. 11 plains, 9 islands, 1 temple of 4 Tranquil Coves. So this deck plays a total of 25 lands. Pretty solid deck. It's pretty cool little enchantment interaction. Definitely something kind of cool. Each of these decks, from what I've seen, all have these little like unique things that bring a unique aspect of the set together in a unique way to kind of gain little benefits and things like that. Next deck up is the Gruul Starter deck, which this one here is pretty straightforward. It's a very aggro-y aggressive deck. If you've seen Gruul decks, pretty much the goal here is just to kind of hit our opponent as quickly as possible for as much damage as possible. Eventually it starts to play big things, but the goal here is to get a lot of damage in early. So we start off with the 1 mana Almighty Bushwag. It's a 1/1 with trample, but later in the game we tap 4 to give +3/+3. Grimrock Knight is a creature that has Adventure. It has the Adventure ability for 1 red mana. We give target creature +2/+0, and it's a 2 mana 3/1 that can't block. But definitely the first effect is pretty cool because it's a pump effect if we want to use it. Scorching Dragonfire shows an appearance in this deck as a spot removal, allowing us to exile target creature or planeswalker if that creature would die this turn. Unleash Fury is a cool, interesting card from M21. I played it in a draft I did. It doubles the power of target creature until end of turn, so we can swing in with a creature that may be like a 5/4, double the power. It's now a 10/4, and swing in for 10 damage without our opponent really expecting for 2 mana, which is pretty cool. Elysian Caryatid, it's a 2 mana plant that we can tap it for 1 mana of any color. If we control a creature power 4 or greater, add 2 mana of that color instead. So it's a way that benefits as we get into the later game. It will start adding more mana based on bigger and tougher creatures we may have in the battlefield. Also, if you have like an Almighty Bushwag, pump it up to a 4/4 in combat to swing in for 4 damage. On the second main phase, this will actually now produce 2 additional mana. So as a little kind of like thing, you can always pump something up until the end phase, and this will actually then produce that 4 mana ability. Destiny Horde Beetle is the next card. At the beginning of our combat turn, if we control another creature with power 4 or greater, put a +1/+1 counter on this. So now if you have a 4/4 creature, this thing starts getting bigger and bigger. If our opponent can't deal with that other 4/4 creature, this beetle then becomes another big creature that they have to deal with. Also another cool little card that has cool interaction. If we play like an Almighty Bushwag before, use its ability before combat, this now will pump and then it'll become a 3/3, so on and so forth. Ram Through is another interesting card. It's another spot removal card here. Target creature we control deals damage to its power to target creature we don't control. If that creature had trample, any excess damage now gets dealt as damage to that creature's controller instead. So it's just a cool little like, you know, thing to have as additional ability. But really here it's just like we can just redirect damage to anything in case you just want to remove something from the battlefield. Bonecrusher Giant is the next card up. It has a 2-minute adventure ability that's called Stomp. It's pretty much a 2 damage to any target. This damage can't be prevented at instant speed, and also it's a 3 mana 4/3. Whenever it becomes target of a spell, Bonecrusher Giant deals 2 damage to that spell's controller. Even if we don't want to pump it with a spell, it will actually take 2 damage as well. Just a FYI, if in case you haven't played this card. But a 4/3 body that has that kind of protection, especially in the later game, if we're stomping an opponent's face, they may not be able to directly deal with it, so they'll have to figure out a way to wipe it as board wipe or something, or want to force themselves to take that damage. So this 2 damage is actually kind of a pain in the butt if our opponent doesn't want to deal with it. Dreamstalker Manticore is another card here. It's a 4/2. Whenever we cast our first spell during each opponent's turn, it deals 1 damage to any target. So if we have something like, a Ram Through or something like that, we could deal, damage, and then, ping something for 1 damage. Our opponent or a planeswalker, whatever it is, we can kind of, throw some damage around depending on where we need to. But cool little ability that kind of has some interaction with things that happen on our opponent's turn. Hornbrash Mentor is a 3-cost 3/3 from Ikoria. When it enters the battlefield, you get to put a trample counter on target non-human we control. And as a later in the game ability, if we want to at the end of our turn, if we don't want to swing in with it, we had it up as a blocker. We can tap 3 mana and put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control trample. There's a few cards in the deck that have trample, and we can just start making our trampler creatures that much bigger. Definitely a cool little ability, and the ability to give something trample is also pretty cool. Then we got the first Ironian Games. It's a 3-cost enchantment with multiple sagas. If you haven't seen this, another saga thing here. The first saga is we get a 1/1 human soldier we get a white 1/1 human soldier creature token. Second saga, we get to put 3 counters on target creature control. So if we have anything other than this 1 white human soldier, we can put 3 counters on something. And then on phase saga 3, if we control a creature power 4 or greater, we draw 2 cards. And on turn 4, we get a gold token, which is sacrifice, add 1 mana of any color. So the gold is now used to create additional mana later to play something else if we want to. Final card up is Warden of the Chime. It's a 4-cost 4/4. It can't attack unless we control another creature with power 4 or greater. Also has trample. It's a 3 mana trampler. good for blocking, but you know, later in the game hopefully we have some other 4/4 tramplers. Pretty cool card that I have not really seen anyone play, but definitely something that I can see being very interesting in this deck. Next card up is the Leafkin Avenger. It's a 4 mana 4/3. We can tap, add a green for each creature we control power 4 or greater, so definitely something that can create a lot of mana if we control a lot of big things. And then we can tap 7. It deals damage to equal to its power to any target player or planeswalker. So maybe this is a way to finish out the game. Don't have to tap it, just tap 8 mana, do 4 damage. If it's bigger by the end of the game, maybe we'd even do more damage. There's a few ways that we can definitely make this bigger, so it could become that much bigger and that much more of a threat. Then we got the Rampart Smasher. It's a 4-cost 5/5, and it can't be blocked by knights or walls. It's a very Throne of Eldraine card, just because in that set there's a lot of knights in there. So, but I mean, if our opponent has like, you know, defender walls that are trying to block, this thing will just go right through, and it's a 5/5 for 4 mana, so not bad. Terror of the Peaks is another cool, interesting card here, just because it's a 5 mana 5/4 of flying. But the thing here also, just like the Bonecrusher Giant, it has the ability to, you know, if our opponent casts a spell that would target this, it would actually cause, they would actually have to pay 3 life to cast that spell. And then whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, Terror of the Peaks deals that much damage to target creature, to that creature's power, to any target. So, which is pretty cool. If we have this out and then we play like the Rampart Smasher, which is a 5/5, now Terror of the Peaks now does 5 damage to any target, because that creature's power was 5. So now it can deal to the opponent's face to maybe finish out our opponent, deal to a creature that's just in the way for an attack. Definitely a pretty cool interaction when you start playing these bigger creatures. Terror of the Peaks definitely cause some havoc, you know, make our opponent actually, like, you know, not be able to play too much, because our creatures just be able to burn right through it. Then we got Return of the Windspeaker. It's a 5-cost instant speed spell that we can draw cards equal to the highest power among non-human creatures we control. Or we can choose the other ability, which non-human creatures we control get +3/+3. So it's kind of like almost like let's charge it in with all our things, give them all +3/+3. We don't play many humans, so most of our things will be non-humans, so they all get +3/+3. And this could hopefully finish out the game. Or, you know, if we're kind of getting light and we don't have a lot of creatures, we just have one big creature, we can, you know, draw cards equal to that creature's power. So if a creature's a 5/5, we get to draw 5 cards. Escape to the Wilds is another cool little card here. We get to exile the top 5 cards of our library, and then we get to play these cards exiled this way until the end of our next turn. So we may draw up, like, you know, 5 cards. Maybe we can play three of them on turn 1, and then the following turn we can follow up by playing the other 2, or vice versa. And then we may be able to also play an additional land. So if we scoop up 3 lands, we can play 1 additional land on the same turn we played this. And then the following turn we can then, you know, hopefully play some more things from that overall. But definitely a cool little card here to kind of dig a little bit deeper, have some, you know, use. But the only thing is our opponent gets to see what we get, so there's gonna be no surprise if you draw something that's gonna be like, you know, trying to catch your opponent off guard. Then we got the Volcanic Savo. This spell costs X less, where X is the total power of creatures we control. So if we have a board of 2 5/5s, this thing only costs 2. What it does is it deals 6 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. So it gets to do 6 damage to each creature, or up to 6 damage, just because some creatures aren't 6, so it deals 6 damage to each or up to target creatures or planeswalkers. So just because those things may not have that, it's going to do 6 damage kind of regardless. Just enough to kind of kill the creature if it's something like a spot removal. A little bit expensive, but if we have the right cards on the battlefield, this is something that's going to be very cheap just as a 1 of spot removal. This deck also runs 24 lands, 9 mountains, 10 forests, 4 Wicked Highlands, and 1 Temple of Abandon. It looks like each one of these decks runs a temple of some sort, just to kind of, you know, it's an M21 card. I guess they want to splash it in all these decks just so you kind of get used to it. Pretty interesting deck as well. So the next deck up is going to be a Boros Knights deck. This deck is pretty straightforward. It plays a lot of Knights. You may have seen some of these Knights. It doesn't play all the main Knights that you may see like in the typical Knights deck, but play some good ones just to kind of give yourself like an overall Knight ability. It's also Boros mana, so it's just red and white. First up is a 1 mana 2/1 Knight. Whenever it dies, you get a +1 counter on target Knight. The deck is full of Knights, so hopefully this kind of will go somewhere else unless our opponent follows up on their turn 1 and kills it. But overall, pretty cool card in that sense. Then we got the Infuriate, the 1 mana pump card, because our target creature +3/+2. Use a black red cap, a 1 mana red Knight. We can tap 2 mana, give it +2/+0 until end of turn. So, you know, if our opponent doesn't block, we have some additional mana that we're not going to use. We can always just make it +2/+0, just give that little extra bit of damage, or maybe give enough this little Knight enough, you know, damage to maybe kill the opponent's creature that's blocking it. Short Sword is +1/+1 for 1. It's a 1 mana equipment. Definitely a little something to give something, make that a little bit better. Pacifism as something to, you know, put on target creature that our opponent maybe really that's really big, or just make it so that they can't block with it. Tempered Veterans, another knight card that came out of M21. We can tap one, tap it, put +1/+1 counter on target creature with a +1/+1 counter on it, or we can tap 6 mana, tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So pretty interesting. If we have things that have +1/+1 counters on it, we can give this additional for cheaper, or later in the game we can just start throwing +1/+1 counters around to eventually just kind of eventually use the 1 mana ability. Worthy Knight is a 2 mana 2/2. Whenever you cast a night spell, we get a 1/1 night creature. So something that kind of, you know, create some board presence in case we want to get a little bit wide on our opponent. Youthful Knight is a 2 mana 2/1 with first strike. Just definitely a very vanilla 2/1, but definitely something that can, you know, block something and, you know, hit it before it hits it back. Vermac Knight is another knight that we've already seen. Gives target creature +2/+0 for its adventure spell, or it can't block, but it's a 2/1. So definitely a cool card there. Scorching Dragonfire is a 2 mana 3 mana remove or 3 damage removal. If that creature or planeswalker dies, exile instead. We've already seen this in a couple decks of Splash Red. Definitely a good card, I think. Then we got the Claim Contender, another knight thing from Throne. Whenever it enters the battlefield, if we control a knight, look at the top 5 cards of our library, reveal a knight or an equipment or legendary artifact among them and put it into our hand, put the rest in our bottom of any order. So definitely a cool way to dig for some more answers, or dig for another knight, or dig for just anything that we pretty much play in our deck we can pretty much get other than our spells. But overall, most of the things other than I think the Scorching Dragonfire and the Infuriate are all knights, auras, or equipment. So definitely cool there. Ardenvale Tactician's another card here. It has a 2 mana, tap up to 2 target creatures, so we can tap down our opponent at the end of their turn or before combat, and then it's a 3 mana 2/3 flyer. Definitely cool card right there. Then we got the Dub. It's a 3 mana enchant creature. Enchanted creature is +2/+2. It has first strike and is a knight addition to its other types. I mean, the cards are all knights already, so making it a knight as well isn't something that they're not already going to be, but giving it +2/+2 is definitely a little bit good because now we'll have that little bit additional damage that they have to kind of figure out how to deal with. Then we got the Basari's Acolyte. It's a 4 mana 2/3. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter each of up to 2 target creatures we control. So now we get to pump things up a little bit better. This has lifelink itself. Definitely a cool little card. Has a little bit multi-utility. Just pumping our things up just that little bit more. Then is the Basari's Lieutenant. It's a 4 mana 3/4. Vigilance, protection from multicolor. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control. Whenever Basari's Lieutenant or another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, create a 2/2 Night creature token with Vigilance. So it's one of those things that we can kind of create tokens when things die. Even if this dies or something that we put the +1/+1 counter dies, we'll now get additional Night in response, or one of our things that may have gotten a +1/+1 counter from something else in the deck will get even more Knights in response. Then we get the first Fireborn Knight. It's 4 mana 2/3 with double strike. Tap 4 mana, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn, so then it becomes a 3/4 with double strikes. If they don't block it, it's gonna do 6 damage. Has, you know, it deals the damage first. Then we got Haktos, a 4 mana 2 red 2 white 6/1, and it attacks each combat if able. But when it enters the battlefield, choose 2, 3, or 4 at random. So it chooses it pretty much at random, and then it has protection from each converted mana cost other than the chosen number. So if it chooses 3, they can only, you know, things with 3 can only interact with it. It has 2, 3, so on and so forth. But definitely pretty interesting because if our opponent doesn't have like a creature on the battlefield, this is going to attack him for 6. And if they don't have a spell that interacts with it for any of those mana costs, this thing could be on the battlefield and just swing it for 6 damage without them being able to do anything about it. Next card up is the Burning Yard Trainer. It's a 3/3 haster for 5 mana. When it enters the battlefield, another target knight we control gets +2/+2 and trample to and haste on the turn. So if we play this plus something else on the same turn, we can give that other creature haste. Swing in, maybe finish out the game with this. Definitely a cool little card. Given it also +2/+2 and trample, so even if they block, they will still take damage over if they don't have enough toughness to prevent it. Grasping Giant is another card in the deck. It's a 6 mana vigilance. Whenever it becomes blocked by a creature, exile that creature until this leaves the battlefield. So it doesn't say anything about preventive damage, but the fact that now whenever it becomes blocked, we're now taking their things, and the only way that our opponent's going to be able to get those things back that this has taken, it would have to be removing it from the battlefield. So pretty interesting card in that sense, because it just starts stealing things. And the last card in the deck, because it's a night deck, it wouldn't be a night deck without playing something like Embercleave. It's a 6 mana artifact legendary equipment. It costs 1 less for each attacking creature we control. When it enters the battlefield, attached to a target creature we control. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample. It costs 3. But overall, you're going to play this as like a finisher, playing on something like a 4-3-4, 4-5, one of those things, and just to try to get that little bit of extra damage in, because the thing now has double strike and trample. So if our opponent didn't throw their whole kitchen sink in front of it, this thing's going to pretty much finish out the game with whatever creature it's on. This deck also has 9 plains, 10 mountains, 1 Temple of Triumph, and 4 Windscarred Crags. This is a 24 mana deck. Overall, pretty cool deck, cool night deck to kind of mess around with. A cool little tribal deck if you're kind of into that thing. A little bit aggressive, so if you like a little bit more of an aggressive deck, this is definitely more aggro based, so overall cool deck. All right, and the last deck up is actually a black-white starter deck. It's pretty much the goal here is, if you can't really tell if you've seen some of these cards, it is a life gain deck. It takes advantage of us gaining a bunch of life, using Veto if we can draw it, and also using Griffin Area, which is a card if we gain 3 or more life in a turn, we get some Griffins out of it, 2/2 Griffins. So overall, pretty cool deck in that sense. Also has Speaker of the Heavens in there. If we can get to 27 mana, we can start creating 4/4 angel creature tokens. But overall, this deck is pretty interesting, so let's go through it. So the first card up is the Anointed Choister. It's a 1 mana 1/1 with lifelink. Later in the game, you can tap 5 mana, give it +3/+3 until end of turn. But definitely a cool little 1 mana guy that has a little bit of an ability with a little bit of lifelink. Speaker of the Heavens is another card if you haven't seen it. It's a 1 mana Vigilance lifelinker. If we get to 7 or more mana than our starting mana life total, we get to create a 4/4 angel token. So definitely something that we can get in the early game if our opponent can't really do enough damage to us, or we get a wide enough board. So definitely a cool little card there. And creating these 4/4 angel tokens every turn, if our opponent can't remove this card, is definitely can get out of hand very, very easily. Next card up is Shadow Spear. It's a 1 mana equipment. It gives target creature +1/+1 and has trample and lifelink. We can tap 1 mana, give permanents to your opponent's control, lose hexproof and indestructible to end of turn. So let's just say they have something that's indestructible and or hexproof. We can then tap 1 mana, they will lose it until end of turn. Even if they board wipe, the creature's still gonna die, and then we can pay 2 mana and equip it, so to re-equip it to something else. So that's definitely a pretty cool card for this deck, and given something lifelink that may not have lifelink, or just that little bit of toughness and or trample, is definitely cool in that sense. Next card up is the Griffin Area. It's a new card from M21. At the beginning of our end step, if we gain 3 or more life this turn, we get a 2/2 white Griffin. Stack multiples of these, and if we gain 3 mana at least, or 3 life in 1 turn, we'll start popping out more and more birds. Something that if our opponent can't deal with directly, this enchantment will create enough birds. And creating 2/2 birds that have flying are definitely good, because not many people play a lot of flyers. So this is something that can definitely prevent our opponent from blocking these creatures in the air. Then we play Revitalize from M21, allows us to gain 3 life, draw a card at instant speed, which will trigger a Griffin Airy just right by itself for 2 mana, so definitely a good little interaction with this and Griffin Airy. Then we get the Boot Nipper for 2 mana, it's a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, we choose a Death Touch counter or a Lifelink counter. So depending on the situation, we can always give it Death Touch in the later game if we just want to put it on the ground to prevent our opponent from blocking, or in the early game we can always give it Lifelink, and whenever it attacks and or blocks, we'll gain 2 life from it. Tavern Swindler is an interesting card from M21. It's a uncommon, it's a 2 mana 2/2er, but we can tap it, pay 3 life, we flip a coin. If we win, we gain 6 life. So it's like a little bit of a gamble. It's pretty cool to see like things that have gambling in it, in the sense that it's a 50-50 coin toss. If we gain the 6 life, then we try trigger the Griffin Airy. If we don't, then we lose. We just lost 3 life to do it. Unexpected Fangs is another card from Ikoria. It gives target creature +1/+1 counter and a lifelink counter until on target creature. So it's another way to just kind of give things more lifelink, give that additional damage. If our opponent didn't block, we can give one of our Griffin tokens that may have just gone through in the air a +1/+1 counter and or lifelink, triggering another Griffin Airy to create another Griffin. Just giving things more ways to gain life to hopefully trigger more Griffin Aries. Next card up is the Silver Moat Ghoul. It's a 3 mana 3/1 Ghoul. At the beginning of our end step, if we gain 3 or more life this turn, we get to return it from our battlefield, from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and we can use 2 mana and sacrifice it and draw a card. So pretty cool interaction here. Once we play it on the battlefield, every time we sacrifice it and we gain 3 or more life, it comes back on the battlefield. You kind of see a lot of things in the deck actually take effect if we gain 3 or more life. So definitely cool ways to stack that ability. Then we got Vito's Thorn of the Dusk Rogue. It's a 3 mana 1/3. Whenever we gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So whenever we gain 3 life, our opponent's going to lose 3 life. We can also tap 5 mana. All our creatures now gain lifelink. So whatever damage we've dealt in that lifelink exchange, they're going to lose that much damage regardless if they blocked with the creatures we attacked in with. Next card up is the Indulgent Patrician. It's a 3 mana 1/4 fly lifelinker. And at the beginning of our end step, if we gain 3 or more life this turn, our opponent automatically loses 3 life. So definitely a pretty cool card. If we gain a little bit of abilities that allow us to gain a lot of life in a turn. This thing is definitely going to do some additional damage our opponent really can't do anything about. Next card up is Faith Feathers. This is kind of like our pacifism for this deck, but the benefit of this one is we gain 4 life from this, and enchanted permanent can't attack our block, and its activated abilities can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So definitely locks down anything that has tap to do something or pay mana to do something. It prevents them from doing that unless it's tap it to add mana. So definitely a pretty cool little card. We got Baked Into a Pie. Destroy target creature, create a food token. If you don't know what food tokens are, it's one of those things that are from Throne of Eldraine. We can pay 2 mana, sacrifice this artifact, we gain 3 life. There's a lot of interactions like with Cat Oven. If you don't know what that is, we can sacrifice our oven, these food tokens, bring our cat back from the graveyard. This deck doesn't have cats in it, but food tokens are pretty cool because they're like automatic 2 mana, you know, gain 3 life automatically. So definitely good for this deck just because it will allow you to gain 3 life whenever you have a food token on the battlefield. Then we got the Resolute Rider. It's a 4 mana 4/2. We can tap 2 mana, it gains lifelink on the turn, or we can tap 3, it gains indestructible. So in the later game we can swing it for 4, or swing it for 4, and depending on how our opponent blocks, we can always give it indestructible if it's going to try to kill it, or we can give it lifelink if our opponent maybe doesn't block and we deal 4 damage to him. Then you got the Baneslayer Angel, the 5 mana 5/5 flyer for strike lifelink, has protection from dragons and demons. Definitely a cool little card here. Definitely something that's big our opponent has to deal with or figure out how to deal with. It's a little bit more vanilla than more of the cards we're used to currently as a mythic in standard, but definitely a pretty cool little card of its time, and definitely a cool little addition to this deck just because it has first strike, so it's going to deal damage to a creature before you know, they do damage back. So definitely cool there. Then we have the Clackbridge Troll. It's another 5 mana 8/8 trample haster. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 3 0/1 goat tokens. At the beginning of their combat on any turn, our opponent may sacrifice a creature. If that player does, tap Clackbridge Troll. We gain 3 life. We draw a card. So another card that gives us 3 life. Interaction with all other things that whenever we gain 3 life, things happen. And then we get to draw a card too. So a little bit of hand advantage. That's if our opponent decides, or they're going to be taking an 8/8 trample haster to the face if they don't. Then we got Erebos' Intervention. It's a 1 mana X spell. We can choose one of these. Whatever we paid for X, target creature gets -X/-X in a turn. We gain X life. Or we can tap X and we can exile up to twice X cards from our opponent's graveyard. It's definitely a cool way to spot removal in case they're trying to reoccur things from their graveyard. We can just kind of remove a whole chunk of their cards from their graveyard for X mana. So if we tap 4, we get to remove 8 cards, so on and so forth. This deck plays 25 lands, 10 swamps, 10 plains, 4 Skyra Barrens, and 1 Temple of Silence. Overall, pretty cool decks, guys. Let me know which one's your favorite down in the comments below. If you haven't seen it already, there'll probably be something popping up. Hopefully one of these will be the other list of the other 5 starter decks. If you haven't seen that, I'll have all the links for all these deck lists in the description down below if you want to check them out and maybe import them into MTG Arena. Just check them out, maybe play around with them, or maybe tweak them in a way that you like to play them. Let me know which one's your favorite. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you don't know, if you want to know when I post more videos, hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next video.